Washington is preparing a significant escalation in its approach to Venezuela, and inside Caracas, Maduro's behavior suggests real anxiety. Well, I mean, he does have a U.S. carrier strike group floating in his backyard. From covert operations to psychological pressure, the U.S. appears to be laying the groundwork for a next, possibly more aggressive phase of operations. I'll have the details. We're starting things off today with new reporting that the U.S. campaign against Nicolás Maduro's government in Venezuela is about to shift gears. According to a Reuters exclusive, 4 U.S. officials say Washington is preparing to launch what they describe as a, quote, new phase of Venezuela-related operations in the coming days. And while officials aren't publicly outlining what that phase involves, the signs suggest a growing pressure campaign on a regime already showing clear signs of stress. The Reuters reporting describes internal conversations across several U.S. agencies pointing toward more direct efforts aimed at Maduro's political and security apparatus. Now, this isn't just about narcotics trafficking or disrupting drug routes. Those are areas where the Pentagon and DHS have already been active in the Caribbean. This new phase appears tied specifically to the Maduro government itself. One official told Reuters it reflects Washington's assessment that the current posture hasn't shifted the regime, and that next steps may be needed to apply pressure more directly. At the same time, the U.S. continues expanding the tools that legally justify more assertive action. As we reported last week, organizations connected to the Venezuelan security state were labeled terrorist entities, opening new avenues for financial targeting and military options. So, what might this, quote, new phase look like? Well, we don't know for sure. But another report out this weekend gives us a clue about at least one option on the table. CBS News says officials in the Trump administration discussed dropping leaflets, that's right, leaflets, on Caracas, an old-school psychological operation aimed at undermining Maduro's public narrative. The discussions reportedly focused on using the leaflets to highlight corruption inside the Venezuelan government and to encourage military defections. Sources also described a debate over timing and messaging, suggesting this is more than a theoretical conversation. While no final decision has been made, the fact that it's being seriously considered hints at how Washington views the role of psychological pressure within this next phase, creating instability inside the regime without immediately escalating to military action. And that brings us to a third piece of reporting from this weekend. Nicolás Maduro appears to be feeling the pressure. According to the Financial Times, Maduro has quietly tightened his personal security in recent days. His public appearances, which are normally a central part of his political persona, have been shortened, choreographed, and in some cases relocated at the last minute. The report cites people familiar with his movements who say his protective detail has grown substantially with increased involvement from Cuban security personnel. Maduro has been limiting his routes, avoiding night appearances, and reducing contact with large crowds. The tone of the FT report is notable. It describes a leader who appears concerned about both external threats and internal stability. This shift coincides with the U.S. planning a new operational phase, and it follows several incidents inside Venezuela, including unexplained arrests and movements within the military that point to a regime increasingly worried about infiltration and coup plotting. So, you ask yourself, where does all this leave us? Well, on one hand, Washington is signaling that the status quo isn't producing results, and officials are preparing for tactics that apply more direct pressure, potentially psychological, potentially covert, potentially military. On the other hand, Maduro's behavior suggests that the pressure is having an effect. Leaders who feel secure don't typically redesign their security perimeter or cut down their public exposure. But the escalation, of course, isn't without risk. Any increased U.S. activity, whether leaflets or something more aggressive, raises the chances of miscalculation. Venezuela's neighbors, including Colombia and Brazil, are, of course, watching closely. Russia and China, both of whom have vested strategic interests in Maduro's survival, are likely weighing how to respond as well. And ordinary Venezuelans may find themselves caught between a cornered regime and a more forceful U.S. strategy. All right, coming up next, high-stakes talks in Geneva over Washington's Ukraine peace plan, and Israel carries out an airstrike targeting Hezbollah's top military commander in Beirut. I'll be right back. Hey, Mike Baker here, with a message from my friends at Tri-Tails Beef. All right, here's the deal. Tri-Tails Premium Beef, a terrific fifth-generation Texas ranching family, is running their biggest Black Friday event of the year. Now, you've got to check out Tri-Tails. I'm serious. They're all about raising cattle the right way and delivering delicious beef right to your door. I love their steaks and roasts. So here's the deal. With every qualifying purchase, you're getting a gift added to your order. No gimmicks, no runaround. Just spend and get rewarded. This is about putting the best-tasting beef you've ever had on the table. Ribeyes, fillets, roasts, steaks, come on. And getting something extra while you're at it. If you've been waiting to stock up, well, now's the time. Feed the family and grab your Black Friday gift before it's gone. Head on over to trybeef.com/PDB. Again, that's trybeef.com/PDB. Welcome back to the PDB. I want to return to the ongoing White House push to bring the war in Ukraine to a close, as representatives from the U.S., Ukraine, and several European governments met in Geneva to go over Washington's proposal. Officials spent Sunday dissecting the Trump administration's peace framework, a plan that many EU capitals are obviously uneasy with. Even so, the effort to press Kyiv and Moscow toward a settlement is only intensifying. Although, to be fair, at this stage, from what we've been told, the pressure is on Kyiv rather than on Moscow. As we've been tracking, President Trump sharpened his message this weekend, telling reporters that Ukrainian President Zelensky can either accept his 28-point plan by Thursday, which in the U.S. is Thanksgiving, or, in his words, quote, continue to fight his little heart out, end quote. It was one of the clearest signs of how the White House is framing the choice for Kyiv. Accept a peace that Ukrainians see as deeply unfair, or risk losing the weapons and intelligence that have kept the country in the fight with Russia for nearly 4 years. At the same time, Trump signaled he hasn't completely locked the door on Ukraine. When asked by reporters whether this was his final offer, the president answered, quote, no, adding that he wants to get the peace and that the war, quote, should have ended a long time ago. Well, maybe talk to Putin about that. The Thanksgiving date he set, as we covered last week, remains a target meant to keep talks alive, not a hard cutoff, apparently. But what's changed since then is where the diplomacy is happening and who's trying to rewrite the script. In Geneva, Secretary of State Marco Rubio and U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff were face-to-face with Ukrainian officials and key European partners, trying to hammer the Trump-drafted plan into something that Kyiv could live with. An anonymous U.S. official close to the talks said the goal is to, quote, iron out the final details, aren't they far down the road, and produce a deal that is, quote, advantageous to Ukraine, stressing that nothing will be agreed on until Trump and Zelensky get together. Zelensky, for his part, welcomed the diplomatic push and said he hoped the discussion would lead to a meaningful result this week. His message stayed careful, supportive of the process, but without signaling acceptance of the terms. But if Washington is trying to reassure Kyiv that nothing has been finalized, Europe is making it clear that it's not going to rubber stamp Trump's blueprint. As we previously discussed, European leaders were blindsided by the original framework and were furious that they weren't consulted. That frustration spilled into the open over the weekend. Prior to meeting in Geneva on the sidelines of the G20 summit in Johannesburg, South Africa, more than a dozen European leaders, including French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, huddled to draft a supposed counter-proposal. They called the U.S. document, quote, a basis for which will require additional work. Essentially, diplomatic language for this is nowhere near acceptable in their eyes yet. In a joint statement, European leaders warned that the proposed limits on Ukraine's armed forces would leave the country exposed to future Russian attacks, and by extension, threaten European security as well. EU capitals also reminded Washington that any clauses touching on the European Union or NATO can't simply be written in from the White House. They require the consent of member states. Even European Commissioner and President Ursula von der Leyen laid down her red lines. She said any credible peace plan cannot allow borders to be changed by force, cannot impose military limits that leave Ukraine vulnerable, and must reflect the EU's central role in securing peace. She also emphasized that Ukraine has chosen, quote, European destiny, a clear signal that Brussels expects Kyiv's long-term alignment with Europe to be baked into any final settlement, not treated as a bargaining chip. These responses from EU leaders come as the core of the U.S. framework hasn't changed much since our last update. The 28-point plan still demands major concessions from Kyiv, such as ceding territory that Russia doesn't even have, accepting strict limits on the size of its army, and renouncing NATO membership, while offering only vague U.S. assurances of, quote, security guarantees. That's why yesterday's Geneva talks carried weight. Merz said the goal was to shape a peace plan, quote, acceptable to Ukraine that can eventually be put in front of Russia, and warned he's not yet convinced Washington will get the outcome it wants in the next few days. So, where does this leave things? In simple terms, well, the U.S. is racing to keep its Thanksgiving target alive, Europe is racing to blunt the sharpest edges of Trump's proposal, and Zelensky is racing to protect both Ukraine dignity and its lifeline in Washington. And Putin, well, he appears to be supportive of the terms of the White House proposal. After all, it essentially mirrors long-standing Russian demands. Now, perhaps this is apropos of nothing, and I guess it's in the category of for what it's worth. But Neville Chamberlain's peace for our time approach didn't do much for his legacy. Turning to Lebanon, in what was the most consequential hit on Hezbollah's senior ranks since last year's ceasefire, the Israeli Air Force struck deep inside Beirut Sunday, targeting the terror group's military chief, Haitham Ali Tabatabai. It was the first Israeli strike on the Lebanese capital in 5 months, killing at least 5. Israel later said that the operation hit its mark, eliminating Tabatabai, who essentially kept Hezbollah's military operations stitched together. But I'd like to point out that Hezbollah still hasn't confirmed whether he was injured or killed. A silence officials in Jerusalem says speaks volumes. Typically, the Iran-backed group rushes to deny Israeli claims when a senior commander survives, but this time it has not. And in the region, that kind of hesitation is widely read as a sign that Hezbollah is scrambling internally, likely working to contain the fallout from a successful Israeli hit deep inside Lebanon. According to Axios, Israeli missiles struck the 4th and 5th floors of a 10-story building in Beirut's southern suburbs. It's an area long regarded as the heart of Hezbollah's command infrastructure. Now, the strike didn't happen in a vacuum. As longtime PDB listeners know, Hezbollah has been chipping away at the year-old ceasefire, building its forces in the Lebanon's south and moving weapons back into the territory that they had agreed to pull out of. As the Lebanese government has made almost no progress under the ceasefire's framework in disarming the group, Israel argues it's acting now to keep Hezbollah from rebuilding, rearming, and restoring its old frontline posture. Israeli officials said Tabatabai had been a central figure pushing Hezbollah to reject the Lebanese government's call to disarm and had agitated inside the terror organization to end the ceasefire and resume hostilities with Israel. Now, as for Tabatabai, he's been pursued by the U.S. for years. The State Department designated him a specially designated global terrorist back in 2016 and offered a $5 million reward for information leading to his capture. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu said he approved yesterday's operation on the recommendation of Defense Minister Israel Katz and the IDF's chief of staff. Netanyahu described Tabatabai as the man who, quote, led the terror organization's build-up and armament efforts, adding that, quote, Israel's determined to pursue its objectives anywhere and at any time. And the Jewish state's pursuit of anytime, anywhere proved true, as a senior U.S. official said Washington was unaware of the operation. According to Axios, Israel did not give the White House advanced warning. The U.S. official told the outlet, quote, we were informed immediately after the strike was carried out. Another U.S. official backed up that claim, saying the Trump administration knew Israel planned at some time to escalate operations in Lebanon, but did not know the timing, location, or target. According to Israeli officials, Tabatabai was the number 2 figure inside Hezbollah after political leader Nassim Qassem. He assumed military leadership after Israel assassinated several of his predecessors, underscoring how central he had become to the terror group's military apparatus. Okay, coming up in the back of the brief, a grim report from Nigeria where armed gunmen kidnapped more than 300 students and teachers in one of the largest abductions the country has ever seen. I'll have those details when we come back. Hey, Mike Baker here. Now, I suspect you've heard that Black Friday is right around the corner. And you've probably asked yourself at one time or another, I wonder if doctors have Black Friday sales. I'm sure you've asked that question. Well, the doctors at Brick House Nutrition, they do. They've just announced their Black Friday 30% off sale, the biggest sale of the year. The most impressive health and nutrition products in the industry are now 30% off. For example, Lean, L-E-A-N, Lean, the doctor-formulated weight loss supplement for people who want to lose meaningful weight without injections. And 30% off Creatine. Creatine, designed just for women to help you look leaner, in shape, and toned without extra dieting or exercise. Even 30% off Field of Greens. You got to try this stuff. It is terrific. It's the only superfruit and vegetable drink shown in a university study to actually slow aging. And only Field of Greens promises better health results that your doctor will notice. Every Brick House product, from better sleep to superior collagen, is 30% off. But hurry, because these Black Friday deals go fast. Visit brickhousesale.com and save 30%. That's brickhousesale.com. One more time, you say? Okay, brickhousesale.com. In today's Back of the Brief, what began as a routine morning at a Catholic school in central Nigeria spiraled into one of the country's worst mass abductions, with more than 300 children and staff taken by gunmen. The Christian Association of Nigeria reported the abduction. 315 students and 12 teachers vanished from St. Mary's School in Papiri. But as grim as those numbers were, authorities now say there's a small breakthrough. 50 of the children have reportedly managed to escape their captors, and that's according to the Christian Association. A large-scale search and rescue operation remains underway for the remaining 265 children and 12 teachers who were taken deep into the surrounding forests. Government officials say troops are pushing farther into the terrain and that more recoveries could follow, though there's still no firm word on condition or whereabouts of the hostages. Niger State Police say the attack unfolded Friday when armed men slipped onto the campus and moved through dormitories where students were preparing for their school day. By the time staff realized what was happening, the gunmen were already gone. State authorities damningly revealed the school ignored a directive to shutter its facilities for several days following an intelligence warning about an elevated security threat. That's a lapse that parents say exposed students and staff to a, quote, avoidable risk. And Friday's attack wasn't an anomaly. It was the third major kidnapping in Nigeria last week. More than 20 schoolgirls were seized from a boarding school in a neighboring state Monday, and a church attack in the country's west left 2 dead and 38 others abducted, though those 38 were freed on Sunday. Still, the abductions are feeding a sense that the country's security situation is rapidly breaking down faster than the authorities can contain it. So, you ask, who's to blame? Well, government officials point fingers at ransom-seeking armed gangs who've turned kidnapping into a lucrative business model. Nigeria outlawed ransom payments to starve them of cash, but so far the ban hasn't changed much. At the same time, the violence reopened wounds over claims of religious persecution. President Trump earlier this month argued that Christians in Nigeria are being targeted, saying he could send U.S. forces in, quote, guns a-blazing, if Abuja continues to allow the killing of Christians. Nigeria's government, though, insists that Washington's rhetoric is a, quote, gross misrepresentation of reality. Despite government claims, reports do indicate that some of the worst ongoing bloodshed in central Nigeria stems from Muslim herders targeting largely Christian farming communities. And that, my friends, is the President's Daily Brief for Monday, the 24th of November. Now, if you have any questions or comments, please reach out to me at pdb@thefirsttv.com. And I hope you had a chance to catch this weekend's episode of our PDB Situation Report. If not, just head on over to YouTube and search at President's Daily Brief, or check out whichever platform you use to get your podcast fix. I'm Mike Baker, and I'll be back later today with the PDB Afternoon Bulletin. Until then, stay informed, stay safe, stay cool. Hey, Mike Baker here with a message from our pals over at Birch Gold Group. Well, it is that time of year again. Oh, correct. It's the one time of year that Birch Gold Group gives away free gold with every qualifying purchase. That's right. For Black Friday, when you convert an existing IRA or 401k into a tax-sheltered IRA in gold, Birch Gold will send you free gold to your home for every $20,000 purchased. Look, gold started this year at about $2,600 an ounce, and by October, it was over $4,000 an ounce. And you ask why? Well, the answer is basically global uncertainty. 2025 has been defined by trade wars and real wars and general unease. And central banks are pulling away from the U.S. dollar as the global reserve currency. So as you probably know, gold thrives in times of uncertainty. So if you're looking to diversify your savings, Birch Gold can help. Plus, now through the 30th of November, get free gold with a qualifying purchase. Just text PDB to 989-898 to claim your eligibility and for a free information kit on gold. But your opportunity for free gold with purchase ends on November 30th. So don't wait. Text PDB to the number 989-898 for all the details.
Hey, thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and leave a comment, a really positive, nice, and kind comment. That would be appreciated. And if you're not already subscribed to our channel, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our daily updates.